Today is lecture number 2 in the Convergence seminar, and the general theme will be about innovation, of course. And today's lecture, lecture number 2, is focused on biology, adaptation, and evolution. And as you all know, the question, the short assignment for this lecture, and I believe I received it from most of you. I received many of the responses. I haven't gone through all of them. But the question was, describe or name one innovation in biology. And we'll go over some examples today and why this is very important. So as mentioned, we discussed last week about what is innovation, an overview of innovation, the many different kinds of innovation. And this week we'll be talking about adaptation and evolution, innovation in biology. Now, I know at Digist, we have a convergence education. All of you students are undergraduates are studying all the different subjects, physics, chemistry, biology, etc. But I also know that some of you are focused maybe on the physics side, maybe more engineering, maybe more chemistry, and not all of you are involved in biology. Well, there are two reasons why biology is very important in this course early on as lecture number 2. One reason is that as a convergence seminar, we're going to talk about many subjects, including, of course, the arts and literature, starting next week. We'll talk about that. And the second reason is that biology is the best example of innovation that we've seen in the universe. The history of life is 1 billion years on Earth. And over that 1 billion years, it's been kind of like a research and development period. And experiments have been taking place, different species, and over all that time, continual changes, testing, and evolution. And so the best example of innovation is, in fact, in biology. And so biology is a very central subject when it comes to innovation. Even if you're innovating in telecommunications, if you're innovating in engineering, or whatever field you're innovating in, even services and business models and so forth, the examples of biology are extremely important. And we'll see that in today's lecture. Additionally, the whole process of evolution and its 3 basic principles of evolution, which we will review today, the process of innovation, that process of evolution, is essentially probably the best method of innovation. Later in the course, we'll talk about many methods of innovation, but evolution itself, as it occurs in biology, is the most powerful paradigm for understanding innovation and doing innovation. So adaptation, evolution, innovation, and biology. And of course, in the second half of the course, we'll be doing various applications and methods, other methods of innovation. The first thing I want to show is a video. I had sent you an email earlier today about a company that I'm working with, Flight, and they gave many companies gave presentations at the Canadian finals for the Entrepreneurship World Cup. And my colleague Dan Cohen's presentation was outstanding. So I know that many of you are interested in this course, innovation, because of course, startups and entrepreneurship and all that. And we will talk about all these things in more detail, but I thought this was a very good example. So I wanted to show this on YouTube very quickly. So this is the Entrepreneurship World Cup. And I'll move all the way to Dan's presentation. So listen
difficult
carefully.
job finishing up after all of these great presentations, but I'm confident he's going to share something that we're excited about. It's my pleasure to welcome Dan
Can you hear the
from
video?
Flight Material Sciences to the virtual stage.
Hello, everybody. Are we coming through?
We can see you, and if you go into a full screen mode, you'll be set. Perfect. Looks great.
Okay, thanks, everybody. It's one thing to have a hard act to follow. It's another to have 8 hard acts to follow. But I'll do my best to keep you awake for this last one and get you home on time. Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Cohen, the founder of Flight Material Sciences, and it's a privilege to present to the Entrepreneurship World Cup tonight. Back in 2017, I was the head of a solar structures company, and we were looking for a way to keep snow and ice and frost and other agents off of solar panels, and didn't really find what I was looking for in the coatings market or the research market, but we did find this, and it's changed my life and the lives of others now. So Flight Material Science is for industrial products that we depend on. Now, when we depend on these products, every aspect of our daily life, and when their surfaces are affected by rust and fouling and ice, they fail. So we have a radical new treatment to protect all industrial materials using clean lasers instead of toxic coatings. And this technique will protect human life, reduce environmental damage, and improve the safety and performance of products. So let's get into the details. I'd like to teach you about this technology in under 1 minute. This is the surface of stainless steel, and when it's magnified, you can see that its natural texture is rough and random. And when coatings are applied, they eventually fail, leaving the surface vulnerable and scattering toxic residue into the air and water. Our patented pulse technique sculpts a new texture that has a specific function, and this functional texture is one that repels water. We can also make textures that repel oil or attract liquids to the surface. This is all called laser surface functionalization. This is what superhydrophobic metal looks like up close. Liquids don't just run off, but they bounce off the surface, and they take anything alongside with it, like dust or debris. And if water can't stay on the surface, ice can't hold there, and rust doesn't form there, and bacteria won't grow there. So you might think that nanostructures seem fragile, but we've put these results through very harsh testing, and we are ready to face the industrial challenges that our customers have. So we've got an extensive list of opportunities that were validated by technical experts in each sector, reducing the 150 million liters of glycol in aircraft de-icing, to getting a 20% increase in solar energy, making better cardiac stents, and much more. So after living with the risk and loss and damage associated with coatings for decades, our customers are thrilled to try something new. And each of these problem areas is attached to a multi-billion-dollar industry, ready for disruption and hungry for real change. So in the $100 billion coatings market, there's a $2 billion niche with many new products that offer superhydrophobic benefits. These are our competitors, but we're not a coating. Our patented technique has the benefits of the best of these coatings with none of the downside. None of our competitors can sustain years of exposure to sun or rain or salt water in the harsh environments of aviation and space, or in the vulnerable spaces of the human body. Our team has more than 100 years of experience in early stage technology, in clean tech and medical, and university tech transfer. We're now a team of 6 with an advisory board, and we're adding experts with deep industry background. We have an effective balance of personalities, nationalities, and perspective here. This work has yielded a collection of published papers and patents and a tremendous amount of press coverage. We're the proud graduates of innovation groups from around North America, and our first customers come from across the industry sectors to solve a problem that coatings have not solved. So we've got a promising future, a deep pipeline of Global 1000 customers waiting for us, and our network and innovation has provided the rest of the traction. And we've barely begun to sell, but we've got millions in pipeline lined up. And as we advance, the average client will provide 5 to 15 years of recurring revenue at a margin of 80 to 90% with a strong chance of renewal. So at Flight, we envision a world where drinking water comes through clean pipes, and our ships sail through the ocean without poisoning the water, and everyday surfaces don't hold dangerous pathogens. This isn't a technology that makes a company, it's something that creates a whole industry. So with your support, we'll expand our mission of making everyday materials extraordinary. Thank you.
Dan, thank you so much for introducing us to Flight.
So that was a 4-minute presentation, and you can see all the other presentations, and those were also very, very good ones. And Flight ended up being in the first place, as I think I mentioned to you in the email. So it's a very good presentation to study, and we'll go over later in the course some aspects of why that's very good. One of the things that's very interesting is the technology is cool, very interesting ideas, very new ideas about changing the surface instead of putting a coating, actually patterning the surface with lasers. But a lot of the discussion in the presentation was about making it into reality. What are the applications? What is the benefits? Who are the customers? And what are the financial aspects related to those customers and the projects? So that was a big focus, not just about the technology, but how it's going to actually make a difference. So as I mentioned, I'm involved in the company, and I'm very confident that with that mindset, not just the technology, but the mindset of innovation that we've talked about in this course, it can have further success. So the question for today, and I would like to have some people participate and share their answers that they sent in, is give one example of innovation in biology. Any examples from the students? So why don't we start with EURIM? EURIM, you want to give an example of innovation in biology? EURIM?
Yes.
Just one or two sentences. Aju kandanhage, one example of innovation in biology.
I wrote the GMO in the
GMO.
yes.
Okay. Can you explain that quickly?
It's genetically modified organism, so
For agriculture, different kind of plants, etc.
yes.
Okay, sounds good. Let's go to Iyunji. Iyunji, why don't you give an example of innovation in biology? Yunji. Yunji, you have an example in biology? Okay, how about Park Min-ji? Park Min-ji, can you give an example in biology?
I would say the invention of the microscope was,
Okay, invention of the microscope.
yeah, because because we can see invisible things.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good answer. Thank you. And what about Chun Ji-yoon? Chun Ji-yoon, what's your example? Chun Ji-yoon? Chun Ji-yoon, an example of innovation in biology? Okay, let's move on. So these two examples, I'm hoping in the future we'll have more discussion. So please be prepared for discussing very quickly when we ask these questions. So the two answers were very interesting because they talked about GMO and microscopes, and these were two examples of human-made technology. And actually, my concept of innovation in biology is actually not human technology, but actually biology itself. In other words, what are things in biology, like the hands, the eyes, or other features of living organisms that represent innovative solutions to the environment? These are examples of innovation in biology. And we will see in the next video a good example of this concept.
In 1989, Japan's Shinkansen bullet train had a problem. It was fast, really fast, like pushing 170 miles per hour fast. But every time it exited a tunnel, it was loud. The noise was coming from a variety of sources, but whenever a train sped into a tunnel, it pushed waves of atmospheric pressure through the other end. The air exited tunnels with a sonic boom that could be heard 400 meters away. In dense residential areas, that was a huge problem. So an engineering team was brought in to design a quieter, faster, and more efficient train. And they had one secret weapon. Eiji Nakatsu, the general manager of the technical development department, was a bird watcher.
Different components of the redesigned bullet train were based on different birds. Owls inspired the pantograph. That's the rig that connects the train to the electric wires above. Nakatsu modeled the redesign after their feathers, reducing noise by using the same serrations and curvature that allow them to silently swoop down to catch prey. The Adelie penguin, whose smooth body allows it to swim and slide effortlessly, inspired the pantograph's supporting shaft, redesigned for lower wind resistance. And perhaps most notable of all was the kingfisher.
The kingfisher is a bird that dives into water to catch its prey. The unique shape of its beak allows it to do that while barely making a splash. Nakatsu took that shape to the design table. The team shot bullets shaped like different train nose models down a pipe to measure pressure waves and dropped them into water to measure the splash size. The quietest nose design was the one modeled most closely after the kingfisher's beak. When the redesign debuted in 1997, it was 10% faster, used 15% less electricity, and stayed under the 70 decibel noise limit in residential areas. And it did all that with the wings of an owl, the belly of a penguin, and the nose of a kingfisher. There's a name for design like this. It's called biomimicry.
The people who design our world usually never take a biology class, believe it or not. So they're novices in how the world works.
That's Janine Benyus. Back in 1997, she wrote the book that coined the term biomimicry. It told the story of the innovations in computing, energy, and health that were inspired by structures in the natural world.
Stick like a gecko, compute like a cell, even run a business like a redwood forest.
Benyus has since worked as a consultant for various companies, trying to get them to understand how to take design ideas from nature. That might mean studying prairie dog burrows to build better air ventilation systems, mimicking shark skin to create bacteria-resistant plastic surfaces for hospitals, or arranging wind turbines in the same drag-reducing pattern that schools of fish swim in. Designers get inspiration from a lot of different places, but Benyus thinks many of them could benefit from looking more at the natural world.
So there's a lot of sort of looking at what other people have done, and what they do is they look at all the others and they get ideas. They literally do, you know, a lot of designers have lots of magazines that they look through. They tear those out and they put them on inspiration boards. But they're looking at other human technologies.
Her idea was simple. Designers should get in the habit of bringing a biologist to the table and let them help solve problems by mimicking nature. And there are three main ways they can do that.
You know, you can mimic its form or its shape. You might create a paint for a building that when it dries, it's got the same structure as self-cleaning leaves. Lotus leaves are notoriously great. They let rainwater clean the leaf because they have these bumps, and the rainwater balls up on the bumps and then it pearls away the dirt. So that lotus effect is physical, and you can create a physical structure on the outside of any product. Imagine that on the outside of your car. Rainwater would clean your car. So that's mimicking form. But there's also mimicking process, the processes in the natural world. It might even be, you know, how you mimic how ants communicate in order to efficiently find sources of food or new places to live. And those processes, that self-organization, has been mimicked in software. You know, in things like, autonomous cars and how they're going to move in flocks through the city by talking to one another. That's mimicking nature's process. And then you jump up to the level of mimicking whole ecosystems, right? There's a thing that's a buzzword right now that's really hot called the circular economy, which is essentially, you know, industry saying, you know, there should be no such thing as a byproduct in our manufacturing facility that goes to landfill. It should be used by something else, right? And at the end of a product's life, that product should be upcycled into something else. It's being called the circular economy. Ecosystems do that really, really, really well. You've got a log on the forest floor, and those materials move up into the body of the fungus that eats it. Those materials move up into a mouse. And that mouse material moves up into a hawk, right? And if you think about that as what we'd like to do with local materials being upcycled constantly in our cities, for instance, those ecosystem lessons are really big for us.
And that's the end goal for biomimetic design, making products, systems, and cities functionally indistinguishable from the natural world. Life has been around on Earth for 3.8 billion years, and what designers are starting to realize is that is a lot of research and development time.
The people who design our world have a lot to learn from the natural world. All they have to do is take a look.
Thank you so much for watching. This is one.
Okay. So could you hear that video? Great. So as you can see, it's not so much about biological technology, which some of it is inspired by biology, but it's actually biology has innovation that can inspire other areas. And you saw, for example, the flight presentation, the first one, which was about the surfaces. And then this video was also about surfaces that can create self-cleaning or antibacterial, etc. So flight is hard engineering, nanotechnology, but the types of surfaces are inspired by biology, and we combine those and we learn from them and we innovate. So the first part of this lecture is, or the second part of this lecture is a quick review from last time. We talked about how innovation is the new ideas, invention being put into the market, commercialization. So there are three aspects that innovation has to satisfy. What is possible with technology, what is desirable to users. So you notice that Dan Cohen in the flight presentation was talking about what the customers need and meeting their problems and solving their problems. And then the third element is what is viable in the marketplace. We also talked about, more clarified, the distinction between invention and innovation. So invention is the combination of science and art to get new ideas. And in this course, we will be integrating science and art together and do applied research to develop that new idea, and also marketing to create ultimately innovation. So invention is a new idea, typically the work of an individual outside of reality, whereas innovation is usually groups coming together, because you need all sorts of different skills and abilities to bring this to reality. And it's the process of bringing these new ideas into reality. We talked about the difference between product innovation and process innovation. And often process innovation is more important than the product. And that's one reason why the iPod replaced the Rio. The Rio was a Korean product, good technology, good product, MP3 player, but a combination of design and the process and the business model made the iPod become the global standard at that time for MP3 players. We also talked about disruptive versus incremental innovation. Disruptive innovation is when you have something with a lower quality, a lower performance, eventually reaching the performance of the customer needs and replacing the existing product, which is at a higher cost. And even though it may have higher performance, it is ultimately disrupted or replaced by the lower performance product. We call that a disruptive innovation. We talked about open innovation and closed innovation. Closed innovation is when everything is done in one organization. Open innovation is when you work with many different people around the world or wherever to bring new ideas and create more innovation. We discussed reverse innovation as taking innovation from developing countries and to the developed world. And organizational innovation is to innovate around the actual structure of an organization. The structure of corporations are based on technology from 150 years ago, but the organizations of the future, including startups and big companies, may be actually very different based on the technologies of the current time. And with COVID-19 changing how, for example, universities work and how teaching is done, we can start to see some of the ways these organizational changes will be occurring. So what is innovation? In summary, it is new ideas or a combination of old ideas or combination of new ideas in new ways. So the element of creativity is central. But the key element of innovation, what makes it innovation, is when that becomes a real product or a real service, a real process. In other words, it changes or impacts society. So these are closely related to also to marketing and value and so forth. We will talk about these business concepts later. So the main topic for today is adaptation and evolution. And we have three parts to this lecture. We will give some examples of innovation in biology. Then we'll talk about the theory of evolution very briefly as a paradigm for innovation, a perfect method, if you will, for innovation. And thirdly, just like on the video that you saw, bio-inspired innovation. The video talked about biomimicry. Mimicry means to copy. I prefer the term bio-inspired rather than biomimicry because you may not exactly copy it. You may do it something else, and the biological idea provides an inspiration to part of it. So I think bio-inspired innovation is the more accurate term for this concept, but biomimicry was one of the early concepts there. So we'll give some examples of innovation, talk about a theory of evolution, and bio-inspired innovation. So I know most of you are not training to be dentists. So you might wonder, what is a tooth doing in an innovation class? Well, human beings, the development of human beings had many innovative aspects during evolution. Being able to walk on two legs. It freed up the arms so they could be used for tools. The concept of the opposable thumb, so that you could hold tools and do more complex tasks. Of course, the development of the brain and social networks and so forth. But one innovation, actually, so innovation doesn't have to be, you know, as complex as the brain or as obvious as walking. One innovation in the development was the four-cusp molar. Molar is the back teeth here. This is the incisor. This is the canine teeth. These are the premolars, and then you have the molars. You notice this molar has four apices or four peaks, and that's called, those peaks are called cusps. Here's an example. So the four-cusp molar was an evolution from teeth that had fewer cusps. In other words, 1, 2, 3, and then 4. And this enabled more effective grinding of food, and that allowed human beings to expand their diet. And as you know, human beings are omnivores, naturally. They eat meat, they eat plants, they eat nuts, etc. They are basically can eat anything except poison, of course. And that allowed them to be more efficient in their energy and to be more adaptable for different environments. Not all food is available all the time. And so this four-cusp molar, very simple idea, just creating four peaks on the tooth in the back teeth, was able to greatly expand the efficiency and capability of the human species. So that's one example of innovation. Another example of innovation, which is related to bio-inspired innovation, is that of bone. Bone is very hard, but it's not brittle and it doesn't break very easily. And it's not very heavy, it's actually very strong. So it's hard, but you know, it's hard things like a rock, you throw it and it cracks, or a glass is hard and it easily breaks. A ceramic also breaks. These are hard but brittle, but bone is hard yet flexible. Why is that possible? Well, bone is actually two components. It has protein collagen. Most people think of collagen in the skin, whatever, but actually bone is made extensively of collagen. So in a sense, the collagen, like it's a different kind of collagen, but it's very similar. It's like the skin collagen, but it also has an inorganic matrix with calcium. Calcium, of course, is like limestone, is like very hard. And some rocks are made highly made of calcium. The shell of an egg has a lot of calcium. So that is inorganic matrix, is like a salt, it's very hard. But when you combine the fibers of protein, which are very strong, and the inorganic matrix, which is hard, we get what's called bone, but another word for it is a fiber composite. and many fiber composites in not natural materials, artificial materials have very unique properties of strength and flexibility. And so composites are materials such as reinforced concretes composed of 2 or more different components. The combination of the 2 materials creates a composite with properties that are even better than the individual. So if you look at more detail at bone, this is the bone. It has a hierarchical organization with fibers. The fibers actually have collagen fibers in them, and embedded in the collagen fibers is the hydroxyapatite, this yellow here, which is the mineral that makes it hard. So here's another electron micrograph of that, the collagen, and then you have the mineral deposited around the collagen. So the composite fiber. Another ingenious aspect of innovation that has allowed the plant world to be so successful is its ability to defend against herbivores. So herbivores are organisms that eat plants. So this herbivore wants to eat this plant, but you can have direct defenses, which, for example, if the plant is very hard, if it has a bad taste, if it's hard to chew, it may be unappealing and indigestible to these herbivores. That's a direct defense. You can also do an indirect defense. In fact, some plants have attracted predators, like some insects, that can then indirectly defend the plant by killing the herbivore or interfering with it. So that would be an indirect defense. So the plant's ability to attract insects is actually an innovation that has allowed it to survive. Another example of innovation is the concept of oxygen in the body. And oxygen, as you know, is used for respiration to generate energy. We need to breathe in oxygen to create the ATP and energy to keep functioning. So there are 2 things that have to happen. The oxygen has to be brought from the outside with the lungs and transported in the bloodstream to the tissues. The second thing that needs to be done is that oxygen has to be stored in the tissues so that when the oxygen pressure goes way down, like if you have a sprint or you're very intense exercise, the oxygen is released. So we have essentially 2 functions. This is a graph of saturation or percent of the protein that we're going to show filled with oxygen. And this is the partial pressure of oxygen on the horizontal axis. So we have 2 types of proteins that serve these 2 functions: myoglobin for storing oxygen and hemoglobin for transporting oxygen. And they have different curves, and they have different properties. And those curves ensure that myoglobin, for example, only gives up its oxygen when the oxygen pressure is very low. So that's a good storage form in emergencies for oxygen. Whereas the hemoglobin actually has a 2-phase switch. We call that an oxygen switch. It has a loaded phase here when the oxygen pressure is high, and an unloaded phase here when the oxygen pressure is low. So the hemoglobin can transport oxygen from oxygen-rich lungs to the oxygen-poor tissues. So that's another innovation. So another example of innovation, we talked about collagen, and it's a protein that's very strong yet flexible. Why is it so strong yet flexible? The collagen that is composed of that the ligaments and tendons are composed of actually has a tensile strength greater than that of steel. So if you look at the bridges in Busan, suspension bridge, or some of the biggest suspension bridges around the world, those steel cables are not as strong per inch or per, I should say, cross-sectional area, tensile strength, not as strong as collagen. So what makes collagen as strong is this very strong peptide bond between the 2 amino acids. The peptide bond, for those of you who are familiar with chemistry, we don't need to know the details, is delocalized, so it has a partial double bond character. And that makes it very strong relative to a single bond. But it's also very flexible because around this peptide bond, you can have rotation of the bonds around the peptide bond. So that means this protein can fold into a shape and that shape actually is flexible itself. So this protein is vibrating, as you can see here. So my professor actually in college, Martin Karplus, was one of the pioneers in this area of protein dynamics. Another example of innovation, the golden mole. The golden mole is living in the desert or in caves. There's very little light, no light, and the golden mole basically is blind and cannot see anything, but it has an exquisite ability to find insects and other small prey and find them very quickly. And it basically can hear around. And the way it hears is its whole body is a hearing organ. It pushes its head into the sand, and of course, sound is transmitted very quickly, very efficiently through solids, and so it can hear all insects around and etc. and can find them, and is very efficient. So its hearing is much more efficient in these darker environments than its vision. Another example of innovation is that of the portal circulation. Now, you know that in the body, blood is pumped from the heart to the arteries, and then it is distributed in the tissues in capillaries, very small vessels, and then that's returned to the heart through veins. So the sequence is arteries, capillaries, veins. But in some cases, we have a different arrangement. Not the usual artery, capillary, vein, but we have what's called a portal circulation. And one major area of that is in the gastrointestinal system. So you have here the artery coming from the heart. It goes to the pancreas and the intestine and goes to what's called the portal vein. So you have artery, capillary, vein. And then it goes to the liver, where it has a second capillary network, and finally to the hepatic vein back to the heart. So instead of artery, capillary, vein, you have artery, capillary, vein again. And this is what we call a portal circulation. So the question is why? Why is that existing? Well, one of the reasons is that the nutrition comes through these veins, and the glucose level and other aspects have to be managed very tightly before that blood goes to the general circulation of the heart. So the function of the liver is to manage that drainage from the intestines. It removes toxins, it controls glucose levels, etc. So the pancreas secretes insulin, which, as you know, is related to glucose levels. Diabetics have low insulin, so they have to have insulin injections. And insulin is secreted by the pancreas. Glucose is absorbed by the intestine. Both of those go together to the liver, and the liver manages the blood circulation. Another example of innovation is the darkling beetle. It can live in the desert where there is maybe 1 inch or less of rain the whole year, and it can survive. Now, of course, living organisms, animals like this require water. How does it get water from such a dry environment? And it does that by having a surface. You remember that flight presentation with the hydrophobic surface? It has alternating hydrophobic and hydrophilic surfaces. Hydrophobic on this black part, hydrophilic on the white part, and basically the water is from the vapor. It drinks water from the air. It's concentrated into the hydrophilic section, which goes down into the mouth, and it literally drinks that vapor that's condensed, very small amounts continuously. So this concept of a bio-inspired way of extracting water is being used to extract moisture from the air, creating fog-free windows, mirrors, and other sorts of innovations. Another example of innovation is how the body uses glucose as a universal sort of source of energy. As you know, glucose is used as the main molecule for energy. We talked about that with respect to the portal vein. And this is a diagram of the different one carbon molecules, and they are organized by the most reduced to the most oxidized. Why do we organize this in this way? Well, if we want to extract energy from carbon, for example, if you have oil or gasoline, it can burn or explode. That's because it has a lot of energy. And that burning and explosion ultimately leads to carbon dioxide, which has the lowest amount of energy for carbon. It's the most oxidized. So the reason I organize this chart this way is that methane is the most reduced or least oxidized, and carbon dioxide is the most oxidized, least reduced. So methane, which is similar to fats and oils, has the highest amount of energy. Carbon dioxide has the lowest amount of energy, and it turns out that glucose is in the middle. And so glucose as a universal molecule, very important molecule, can be used both to generate energy, to go down into carbon dioxide, and relatively easy go to more complex, high energy compounds, the opposite direction. So glucose is in the middle, carbohydrates in the middle. And finally, with respect to energy production, we burn this glucose. Biological systems, human beings and other organisms, burn the glucose to produce energy. What do they do by that? They are producing ATP, and that ATP is the energy carrier. But they don't really burn glucose. People are not burning, animals are not burning, plants are not burning while they're living. Burning is incompatible with life. So how is it possible to extract energy from the glucose without burning? Well, it does that by doing all these little small steps. You have the glycolysis, the Krebs cycle. They produce high energy electrons, and those electrons go down the electron transport chain in the mitochondria to very small steps to ultimately produce ATP. So instead of one explosion, which generates a fire, which generates an explosion, we have in biology very many small explosions. And that has two consequences. One, we don't burn up, we don't explode, so we are still able to live and also burn glucose, but in very small amounts. The second advantage is that for those of you who know physics, by the laws of thermodynamics, a reversible process has the most energy efficiency compared to an irreversible process. So what's the definition of a reversible process? It's one that progresses in very small steps. So biological systems have extremely high efficiency of energy extraction, 70%, whereas an internal combustion engine in a Hyundai Genesis or a Mercedes-Benz, whatever, they're all the same, has an efficiency maybe 10%, 15%. The rest is heat. And so this small steps ensures that this is close to a reversible process and is very efficient. Another final example of innovation is the SARS virus. It has a spike protein here, which binds to the ACE2 protein on cells. So this is the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. It binds to ACE2. ACE2 is throughout the body. It's involved in both the lung function, but also involved in cardiovascular function. So this was a very innovative target, if you will, for this virus to be able to invade the body and cause a lot of damage. So let's talk briefly about a theory of evolution. So how does life, over the billions of years that it has developed, come up with all these innovations? Well, the simple answer is evolution. And there are three features of evolution, and those three features of evolution relate to the fundamental process of innovation, whether you innovate a startup, you innovate in your career, you innovate in your scientific lab, whatever it may be. So if we look at an evolutionary system in life, we have organisms which have a genotype, which is the DNA. They have a phenotype, which is the expression of the DNA in terms of features, how it looks, how it acts, how it functions. That's a phenotype. And then, of course, we have the external environment. So 3 features are hereditability of fitness. In other words, the organism should be able to pass on its features to another organism, or to its daughter organism or son, etc. So that's, of course, the process of reproduction. And then during that process of reproduction, the second factor is phenotypic variation. So there has to be a variety or diversity of the phenotypes. If everything is the same, then there isn't a way of testing different traits in order to develop new ones and innovate. And the third component is differential fitness, which is testing those diverse traits in a real environment. So this is where just a new idea cannot always become innovation. It has to connect to reality and be tested. This is this differential fitness. And when it's tested, some ideas will be better than other ideas. So innovation is not a new idea. Innovation is this whole concept exemplified by evolution. A new idea is different than others that becomes successful in the real world. And that's that differential fitness. The third thing we'll talk about very quickly is bio-inspired innovation. So one example is artificial intelligence. Everyone's been talking about artificial intelligence. And neural networks are a major algorithm or a major method of artificial intelligence. And neural networks, of course, are based on nervous systems. So this is the nerve cell, and the nerve cell has a body and an axon. And the basic concept of a cell, and it's as a computing unit, is to integrate the inputs from all the outside of the cell, the dendrites, and the cell body to reach a threshold and then to produce an action potential that you can see here. And neural networks are essentially just combinations of these computing elements, taking all these inputs, integrating them, having a certain threshold, and then outputting it there. So as I said, bio-inspired innovation is all around. We had the Biomimicry Institute that was featured in the video, but we have many other institutes in London, in the United States. Weiss Institute is related to MIT, Georgia Tech, University of Maryland, Western Reserve University, Austria, Penn State University. I don't believe there really is a very major bio-inspired institute in Korea. That's because in Korea, the educational system doesn't really work that way, although Digist is different. You focus on the sciences, and within the sciences, you focus on physics, focus on biology, and then outside the sciences, you do humanities, you do business, whatever it may be. You do these focus, and a semiconductor engineer is not supposed to know about biology. That's not how education works. But as you can see, that kind of approach is limiting. And I think there's a great possibility for a bio-inspired institute in Korea. So here are some examples. This is in Singapore and US, soft manipulation and soft wearable robots. The Weiss Institute, as I mentioned, air purification system based on butterfly wings, information storage in DNA, so biocomputing. This is a paper that I produced when I was at Samsung, at the Samsung Chonggap-Giselwan, myself and Dr. Ryu. Computationally efficient real-time motion recognition based on bio-inspired visual and cognitive processing. So these are artificial intelligence experts, and Samsung was developing a way of motion recognition and facial recognition based on images. Now, the way your smartphone camera works, or any digital camera, is it has a sensor and it has a computing unit or microprocessor. So the sensor has pixels, so we talk about megapixel camera. and it sends those pixels to the processing unit to compute. That is not how the human eye works. So I have a background in medicine and biology. So I was working with that team to develop a system more like how the human eye works. So the retina in the eye, which is the sensor, is not like a sensor in a smartphone. It doesn't just take pixels and send them to the brain. It actually is a computing unit on its own. So this is the retina. This is light coming in here, and this is the light sensitive areas. And you see all these neurons here. It's like a neural network that actually is doing some computation. So the signals sent to the brain are not pixels, but are already pre-processed information about motion and edges. And this was the essential idea of our paper. Another project I did when I was at Chonghap Kisuwan was in microfluidics and biology. This is with Min-Sok Kim, and I was part of this team, a trachea-inspired microfilter capturing circulating tumor cells. And these circulating tumor cells are cancer cells in the blood, and we use a filter to try to capture them and analyze them. Problem with these filters is they get blocked. But the lung, as you know, in the human and animals, has two trachea, I should say two bronchi coming from a single trachea. And so if one bronchi is blocked temporarily, then the other lung can continue to function. So that a temporary blockage doesn't kill somebody right away if you only had one system. So that allows the minimize the chance of blocking. So we developed a bifurcated filter system so that if it got blocked, you would still continue to get filtration. The last slide on this is a patent. I apologize, it's in Hangul law. This was a patent that I developed while I was at here at Digist, and it's for a automotive radar that's based on these protein dynamics to capture living organisms rather than directly, rather than doing that through a visual camera. So you would have the automotive radar, and it would detect something living and non-living and be able to make driving decisions based on that. So the living organism versus a inanimate or non-living would have a different priority if you're crashing the car or had some sort of potential sago or accident. So if we have a radar system that can detect that living organism much faster, much more reliably, then we can also do basis of safer self-driving vehicles. So Jeff Bezos, who is the head of Amazon, has a famous quote, "What is dangerous is not to evolve." So evolution is the essence of adapting, and it's the essence of innovation. And last week's class, I mentioned how innovation is so critical. So next week, we will talk about the history of innovation. The Renaissance and innovation, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Galileo. And as I mentioned in the beginning, innovation is not always pretty, but it can develop very substantially, of course, and even get to the moon in the case of flying machines and airplanes. And that's the end of today's lecture. I need to finish early this week, but I wanted to emphasize that we will have these short assignments. I want to thank everyone for sending them. There were a lot of very good ideas there. And I will be posting in the Google Calendar and send you a message through Kakao Talk of the next short assignment. And next week, we will begin the reading of Waves, the book for the second part of each lecture, where we'll be discussing a literary work and its combination with science. And I will send further instructions by email and Kakao Talk there. I know some of you have gotten the book, and this is a very unusual sort of course, convergence course, but I think you'll find it very interesting and very helpful.